Princess Charlotte, Prince George, and Prince Louis were good people, kind people, people who would never cross a line that should never be crossed. That belief, steady and unshaken for so long, was about to fall apart in the most unexpected and deeply disturbing way. It started on an ordinary afternoon. William was sitting in his private study at Adelaide Cottage, the more modest and quieter home that he and Catherine had chosen over the grandeur of Kensington Palace. The move had been intentional. They wanted a simpler life, closer to the school the children attended, away from the noise and the constant scrutiny. Life there felt more normal, more manageable. The children played in the garden, rode their bikes on the nearby paths, and came home with muddy shoes and loud laughter. For William, that normalcy was everything. It was the thing he had fought hardest to protect. That afternoon, Catherine was out attending a series of engagements related to her early childhood mental health initiative, a project she had thrown herself into with quiet intensity over the past several years. William had cleared his schedule to spend time with the children, though a pile of correspondence still sat on his desk waiting for attention. The house was warm and comfortable, the kind of afternoon where nothing feels urgent and everything feels manageable. He had just made himself a cup of tea and was settling into his chair when his phone buzzed with a notification from the home's internal security system. The royal family maintained comprehensive security at all of their residences. It was not optional, not something that could be negotiated or scaled back. Every home had cameras, monitored access points, and a security team that rotated shifts and kept detailed logs. William understood this as a fact of his life, the same way he understood that he could never truly walk down a street unrecognized or take a holiday without a protection detail nearby. He had made peace with the surveillance long ago. It was the price of who he was, of the institution he represented. Most of the time, he barely thought about the cameras at all. But that afternoon, the alert on his phone stopped him cold. It was a motion-triggered clip from the indoor camera near the sitting room, the room where Charlotte often played after school. The timestamp showed it had been recorded about 45 minutes earlier, while William had been on a call in another part of the house. He tapped the notification without any real sense of urgency. He expected to see Charlotte chasing the family dog, or perhaps George teasing his younger sister the way siblings do. He expected something ordinary. What he saw was not ordinary. The clip was short, no more than a minute long, but it was more than enough. Charlotte was standing near the bookshelf, her back partially turned, reaching for something on one of the lower shelves. Camilla Parker Bowles, his father's wife and now queen consort, was standing just behind her. They had not known Camilla was visiting that afternoon. There had been no scheduled visit, no call ahead, no message to say she would be stopping by. She had simply arrived, apparently let in by a member of staff who had not thought to notify William. That alone was unusual. That alone should have set off some warning in someone's mind. But it hadn't. And so there she was, standing in the sitting room of William's private home, behind his daughter who was entirely unaware of what was about to happen. Camilla's hand moved quickly. She reached out, grabbed a fistful of Charlotte's hair near the back of her head, and yanked. Not a gentle tug, not the kind of thoughtless pull that might happen by accident when a sleeve catches a braid. This was deliberate. Charlotte's head snapped back with the force of it. The little girl let out a sharp cry and spun around, her face crumpling immediately into shock and pain. Camilla said something, her lips moving on the silent footage, but William could not make out the words. Her expression was hard and controlled. Charlotte stood very still for a moment, while one small hand pressed to the back of her head, her eyes wide and wet. Then she turned and walked quickly out of the frame. William watched the clip once, then he watched it again. He set his tea down on the desk without thinking, the cup landing too hard, the liquid sloshing over the rim. He was aware of his own breathing, of the way his chest had tightened into something almost painful. He had been trained his entire life to keep his emotions contained, to process the difficult and the devastating quietly and privately, to present a steady face to the world no matter what was happening behind closed doors. In that moment, all of that training felt completely useless. He watched the clip a third time. He needed to be sure of what he was seeing. He needed to make certain he was not misreading it, not projecting something that wasn't there, not letting old tensions and deep-seated grievances color what his eyes were telling him. He had never had a warm relationship with Camilla. That was not a secret to anyone who paid attention. The history was complicated and painful in ways that could not be fully spoken about in public, in ways that had left marks on him and on his brother that had never fully healed. But he had tried. He had tried to be civil, to be respectful, to give her the space that her marriage to his father required. He had tried, for his father's sake and for the sake of the institution, to let the past stay in the past. What he was watching on that screen had nothing to do with the past. This was his daughter. This was Charlotte, who was 7 years old, who trusted the adults in her life with the open and uncomplicated trust of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid. And one of those adults had hurt her, deliberately, in his home. William stood up from his chair. He walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the garden where the light was starting to fade toward evening. He was trying to think clearly, trying to organize what needed to happen next. He needed to find Charlotte first. He needed to make sure she was all right, needed to talk to her carefully, needed to understand what she had experienced and whether this had happened before. The thought that this might not have been the first time landed in his stomach like a stone. He pushed it away for the moment. He would deal with one thing at a time. He found Charlotte upstairs in her bedroom, sitting on her bed with a book open in her lap, though she was not reading it. Her eyes were fixed on some middle distance, and when William sat down beside her, she looked up at him with an expression that tried very hard to be normal and did not quite manage it. He asked her gently if she was okay. She said yes. He asked if anything had happened that afternoon. There was a pause, a beat too long before she said no, nothing happened. He told her that it was okay to tell him things, that she could always tell him things. She looked at him for a moment, with those steady eyes that so often reminded him of her mother, and then she said that Camilla had told her not to make a fuss about things. The words landed like something physical. William kept his voice calm. He asked Charlotte what she meant. She told him, and in the careful and abbreviated way that children tell things they have been told not to tell, that Camilla had said she was too sensitive and that she needed to learn to be tougher because of who she was and what her life was going to be. Charlotte paused and then added, almost as an afterthought, that it had happened before, not always the same way, but that Camilla sometimes got rough with her when no one else was around. She said it the way a child says something they have normalized, something that has slotted itself into their understanding of how the world works, even when it should never have been allowed to become normal at all. William sat with his daughter for a long time. He kept his voice steady. He told her she had done nothing wrong. He told her that what had happened was not okay, and that it would not happen again. And he told her she was brave for telling him. When she finally leaned into his side, he put his arm around her and held her carefully, aware of a fury inside himself so complete and consuming that it was almost beyond feeling, almost past the point where it could be called an emotion at all. He called Catherine first. Her voice changed when she heard his, the way it always did when something was genuinely wrong. The careful professional composure she carried through public engagements, giving way immediately to the real and private version of herself that only he and a very small number of people ever got to see. He told her what he had seen. He told her what Charlotte had said. There was a silence on the line that felt very long. Then Catherine said she was coming home. She arrived within the hour, her engagement abandoned, on her team left to manage the fallout of an unexpected early departure. She went straight to Charlotte's room and William stood in the hallway and listened to the quiet sound of his wife's voice and his daughter's voice until some of the tightest knot of tension in his chest began, very slowly, to ease. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, William and Catherine sat together at the kitchen table with the footage between them on his phone. Catherine watched it without speaking. When it ended, she set the phone down on the table and looked at William with an expression he recognized, not tears, not visible anger, but that particular stillness that meant she was holding something very large and very heavy inside herself and choosing carefully what to do with it. They talked for a long time. They talked about what this meant and what it had meant and what needed to happen. They talked about who needed to know and how this needed to be handled, and they talked about the institution, about the pressures that always came with the institution, about the expectations that surrounded every decision they made and the ways in which their family was never entirely their own. But beneath all of that, underneath the practical and the strategic and the institutional, there was something much simpler and much more powerful driving everything William said and felt and knew with complete certainty in that moment. Charlotte was his daughter. She was a child, and no title, no history, no complicated web of family obligation or royal protocol was going to stand between him and making sure she was protected. William contacted the appropriate members of the royal household the following morning. The conversation with his father was one of the most difficult he had ever had, and the king's response was measured and pained and careful in the way that royal responses to uncomfortable truths almost always were. But William made himself clear. He was not performing outrage for an audience. He was not issuing a threat. He was simply, very quietly, stating a fact. This would not happen again. Not in his home, not to his children, not under any circumstances, no matter what the political or familial cost. The security footage was preserved. The access protocols for the family's homes were reviewed and tightened. Charlotte began seeing a child therapist, someone Catherine had known through her early childhood work, and someone gentle and skilled and completely outside the circle of royal life. Charlotte, over the weeks that followed, slowly began to talk more openly, to sleep a little better, to come back to herself in the incremental and hopeful way that children do when they feel safe again. William watched all of this with a grief that he kept largely to himself and a resolve that never wavered. He had grown up in an institution that valued continuity over honesty and image over well-being. He had watched that institution fail the people inside it in ways that had cost real and lasting damage. He had promised himself, long before he had children of his own, that he would do things differently, that his children would know they were seen and believed and protected, that the walls of the palace, however gilded, would never be walls they were trapped behind. He had meant that promise when he made it. He meant it even more deeply now.